Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And you have before you roll call, and I'll ask Madam Secretary if you'll call roll, please. Good morning, Rosemary. Or Mr. Perkins.
Good morning, everybody.
Mr. Bivens?
Here.
Dr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Crane?
Here.
Mr. Fishman?
Here.
Mr. Hale?
Here.
Mr. Heiss?
Here.
Mr. Horn?
Here.
Mr. Perky?
Here.
Mr. Ramsey?
Here.
Mr. Rangel? Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Snyder? Mr. Swan? And Ms. Wigington?
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'll call the meeting to order. And you have before you the summarization of the minutes of January the 11th, July the 11th, 2019, which was the last meeting of the board. And at that meeting, you have a copy of the summarization of those minutes before you. And at that particular time, we considered the sales and property in the East Tennessee Progress Center to advance to, and recommended that to the city council for approval of the project. And the second thing that we did at that meeting was approve some request for funds for the East Tennessee Progress Center that Mr. Ramsey reported on. Is there any question about those minutes or anything of them? If not, the chair will entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the records reflect that the summarization was reviewed.
You heard the motion. Is there a second?
I'll say motion.
Mr. Perky, second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. And the motion's carried. And the next item on the agenda is the annual election of officers. And the present officers are myself, James Crane is vice chair, Marshall Ramey is secretary treasurer, and assistant secretary treasurer is Anderson Smith. The chair is open for nominations or motion. Anybody?
I move that the nomination cease and the current members be elected by acclamation.
Second.
Dr. Campbell moved, Mr. Hale second. Any further discussion? Not, I'll call the roll, Madam Secretary.
Dr. Campbell?
Aye.
Mr. Crane?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Heiss?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky? Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Wigington?
Yes.
And Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Motion's carried and so ordered. Next item on the agenda is the consideration of an amendment to the Merchants Green Tax Increment Financing Project. And you have before you
No, we don't.
you don't have before you those documents yet. Bill, I'll introduce you.
No, we don't, we weren't given the documents to proceed yet. The documents aren't ready to proceed, it probably just needs to be pulled off the agenda.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That we've not been given the documents yet, so they still owe us documents that we don't have, so we can't take any action on it.
On the Merchant Screen
Yeah.
project?
Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't received the documents. When are we gonna get those documents?
I don't know. Not sure.
What do we do?
Well, there's some items they need to provide, I guess, documentation of completion to the city. And then once that's completed, they can submit documents to us for, I guess, approval.
All right, so they've got to provide some documents.
But they have work to complete.
They have work to complete, and then what?
And then the board probably will have to meet again, approve, or will recommend an extension of the development agreement. If they can't complete all those items in that time, we'll have to recommend an extension of a development agreement. Then they'll have to perform the work, we'll have to get invoices, have a third-party engineer review those, and approve those, and then a payment. So it's still a lot that's not been completed.
Okay, so,
Mr. Chairman, it's been a while since we've had a TIF, and I know it's a tax deferred benefit. How does that work exactly? I forgot, it's been 2 or 3 years since. we've
Okay,
had one.
just, Jay,
Yeah.
Jay, that's why you're here.
My name's Jay Moneyhunt. I'm with
You don't have to go into a lot of detail, it's tax deferred for the industry, but I forgot the details.
Right. So this, the merchant screen TIF was approved by the city and the county a few years ago for that development. And what happens is, at the incremental taxes, property taxes that are generated by new development in that area, are used to pay public infrastructure for that development. So,
Okay.
say there's, they were paying $100 in property taxes initially, but they developed the property and build new improvements on it. The increase of those taxes goes to pay the public infrastructure and
And for how long does that go on till the infrastructure's complete?
the allocation period, so the allocation of those incremental taxes goes on for a period of 20 years as to each parcel. Or
Okay, I just forgot about the infrastructure aspect of it,
So the incremental taxes that are created service the debt.
correct, yes.
It
So-
may not go 20 years, it may go 13, 12.
Right.
As long as it gets paid, whenever it's paid, then it's done.
Just a good incentive for them to go ahead and build out what they're doing.
For example, it's a way like when the mall was built here. The mall came and said, we need red lights, we need roads, we need all these
Yeah.
things, and the city just had to write a check at that time. They said, here's the amount, the city pays the amount and writes the check. This is a way the developer creates an increase in revenue and uses that increase.
Yeah.
Instead of coming out of a general fund, it's used through the increase.
It's an attractive benefit to.
And it's in a case when you have really high development costs where you couldn't do the development cost otherwise. It just wouldn't make sense to do it.
And we, the city or county, don't lose anything because it's money we wouldn't be getting if they weren't there.
And I think, I don't know if I should say this, the attorneys have told us ours is one of the least generous. So we don't give 100% of the increment, we give a much smaller percentage.
Yeah.
So we don't give 100%, we give 50 to 75%. So we immediately gain tax revenues when it starts.
So what do we have now? 4, 5 of these TIFs?
Did we have 5 ongoing?
6.
6 ongoing?
And then aren't they required to make annual accountings
Yes.
to the board? Are those being done?
Yeah, so they do, and they coordinate with the banks. They have their annual payments and, they kind of, either they come up short and the developer pays the amount, or they pay the additional amount and goes to principal every year.
So is
Since
it the financing institution's ongoing responsibility then to monitor that as opposed to the board?
Jody and I, with the city, monitor it with the board, we track it. But yeah, the bank, in the end, the bank's the one with the risk.
Sure.
So our only commitment is that incremental revenue to help fund that debt. So yeah, the bank's the ones that really stand to lose the most, so they're taking a chance.
Since it's this far along with the merchant screen, would it be feasible for us, rather than meet again, to designate the officers or committee to go ahead and execute it if they get the appropriate paperwork complete?
Honestly, I doubt it.
Huh?
I doubt it. I'd say we'd have to
Do you
meet.
think we ought to meet?
I'd have to ask Bill or Jay, but I would think we'd have to meet.
I'm an industrial board.
Which it may be a while. I mean, knowing what's gotta be done, it'll
Okay.
probably be a while.
I thought it'd be soon.
Any other questions? Basically, in case you missed the point, in layman's language, the TIF program basically allows, like Marshall said, in the case of Merchant Green, we had to move roads, we had to put up, build streets, we had to extend sewer, we had to do all of these infrastructure things, because basically, just like Merchant's Green, it was a farm, okay? Well, you can't build what's there on a farm without the infrastructure. And what this does is, in simplest language, is the developer makes an arrangement with the bank to borrow the money that they pay for the infrastructure, in essence, and then we pay for that. And it's worked 5 or 6 times very well, type thing, and it's provided, it's caused the city not to have to provide the cash up front to do those things. Any other questions about it? Okay, I really think in this particular thing, Randy, let me ask you, you've been involved in the development of the Merchant Screen situation, and it appears that some of the things are not complete, and I don't know what they are, type of thing. Do you think, as our engineer, that it would be better, rather than the executive committee doing this? Don't you think it'd be better for the full board to meet?
I can just kind of tell you where things are to date.
Okay.
Michael Price, who's been doing the independent review, approved a pay request, which totaled to date $3,069,506.63 through November the 17th of 2017. At that point in time, that was against the original budget of $4,280,000, so it was almost 90% complete. After that, the developer had to pay 2 vendors, Geo Services, $7,375, Van Hoos, which is concrete pipe and structures, $59,379, Newport Paving to get the roads paved, $134,866, and $1 million to the contractor who went bankrupt. So to date, from what I can tell from the files, there's been a total of $4,271,126 paid toward the development of the project. So there's about a difference of $8,000. Draw requests that the government's made, $980,000 was draw 1. Draw 2 was $469,369. Draw 3, which was submitted in January and is still outstanding, is $355,000. So there's $1,804,000 once this $355,000 is paid against the expenditures of the developer of $4,271,126. So basically, he's gotten ahead of his reimbursements, which kind of goes with the TIF because it's going to pay over time. I also have a document about traffic signals, and the traffic signals, TDOT, has got to have the warrant on place on that. That's not been done. I am aware that, the developer has gotten Clint Harrison to make a list of the outstanding issues that need to be completed so he can find another contractor to complete it, since his contractor went bankrupt.
In view, Jack, of that detail and that type of thing, I would ask that you would withdraw your motion, because I really think that the full board needs to be concerned.
I didn't make a motion, I was asking a question, but I withdraw it, yeah.
Does everybody concur with that? Okay, thank you. All right, and the next, that's all on item 4 on the agenda. Item 5, consider lease of Prospect East Park with Senator Marshall.
This one's a simple one. So I'll go to the map here. So Keith Andrews here represents Tough Torque. And what we have here is a company that currently lost their test track lease. So the properties we're looking at are in the back corner of the park. That's lots 15 and 16. 15 and 16 totaling about 55, 56 acres.
Excuse me, you're talking about the Airport Industrial Park?
Oh, I'm sorry, the East Tennessee Progress Center.
Okay, thank you.
So, these are the back corners of the property, undeveloped today. We do have John Litz that farms some of it. The biggest problem we have in there are people sneaking in and turkey hunting. So for us to get some activity in the back part of that park, Ed. No, we do, when we get that, we call TWRA and the police, but it's kind of hard to catch those guys. But our goal is, if we get some activity back in there and some people utilizing it, that'd be great. What I think we would do, we have to recommend the lease to the city, so since the city formally approves it, we would recommend that lease at a cost of $5,000 a year. They've had an attorney draw up documents, I think, for the city attorney's reviewing that. But basically it's pretty standard. They provide the liability insurance and they construct what they want on site. Any buildings that they construct has to come to us for approval, but you're not gonna really have any road visibility back here. But in the end, I've been to their other track and I can tell you, it says they can move dirt and do all this. They're not building a motocross track. When you walk up to it, you won't even see it until you're in the vehicle and you see 2 little tire tracks going through. It's pretty non-invasive. Met with John Litz to make sure it kind of goes with his farming use and they can work together, and John will use the good stuff and Tough Torque will kind of stay in the trees and in the areas that John doesn't farm. So it's a good match for us to get somebody, if nothing else, protecting that back part of the park.
And I suspect that is in Hamlin County?
It is in Hamlin County, correct. You do have TVA transmission line, so that's going to make real development of those lots long-term pretty difficult. So this is a pretty good use for the edge of that property. Keith, any comments?
This is for where they test the lawnmowers?
No.
No, we manufacture transmissions and drivetrain products for the side-by-side vehicles. So we're testing vehicles that run anywhere from 50 to 80 miles per hour off-road. So we've got to do endurance testing, performance testing, data collection. And also, we've had a number of new customers come in, and our previous test site was about 80 acres in Jeff County. And when we would take them there, they were very impressed with it. It helped us secure a business to have this ability and area. So now that we've lost a current one, we need another one. And so basically we come through and mow out a track, clear out a track. Our last track was about 1.5 miles long, 2 miles long, and go out there and do evaluation on the vehicles.
Mow it with a John Deere tractor.
So this is some property that's in the park now.
Yes?
Yeah. Why did you lose the other property just to development?
Went bankrupt, the owner.
And I will say, do not let him take you for a test drive.
So the time of the lease was how long?
The lease was in there for a year, we self-renewed 3 years. And
Yeah, I think we
renewed.
actually left it blank for whatever you guys wanted. We hadn't set we were gonna let the city work with you to set the
Right.
final terms.
Yeah, our previous
Whatever you
lease
prefer.
was a year-to-year lease with self-renewing until one of the parties canceled. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We plan to use this for a long term. That's where we would like to be. That was with the current property. We plan to be there for a long time. We'd put some, we'd spend $10,000-15,000 in excavating just to get the track, remove some trees, things like that. And we had hoped we'd still had it, but now with the current situation, we need a second place. So we're looking for a long-term use of this property.
Mr. Chairman, move for approval.
Go ahead, Andy. I'll second the motion.
You've heard the motion that the industrial board recommend a lease for 3 years, to Tuftor.
No term.
Or if we do a term, Keith, are you 1 year terms?
1 year term is fine.
Let's do 1 year terms, and then that way we can send it to the city 1 year at $5,000 renewable by either party.
Party.
It's 1 year and renewable, is that what you're saying?
Yes, if Mr. Smith's, if that's
That's
okay.
fine.
And this is a recommendation of the council that they approve that.
Call for the question.
I don't, you heard the call for the question. Let me ask our engineer, and I don't see that it conflicts, but our council has asked, do you think that is there any problem or conflict, let me put it that way, is there any conflict with protective covenants of the park for that being there?
As far as,
I'm sitting here looking at them.
yeah,
And I don't see anything like that.
as far as what we've got in the covenants, we've got several things like slaughterhouses and other things that aren't listed. We have in the past, for example, had the city's, I've lost the words, gun. Firing range, thank you, Tony, on property that's kind of hard to develop and that type of thing. Where this was in the part of the park, it was up in the upper reaches that would be very difficult to try and improve, and actually is very suitable to what Tough Court needs. It's very similar to the property that they unfortunately could not use anymore because of the bankruptcy that occurred. So, Mr. Chairman, to answer your question, one, I don't see that it's a violation of our covenants, number one. Number two, I think the fact that you've had the discussion of the board, understanding this, and therefore make the recommendation to the city, I don't see a reason why we can't proceed.
You heard the motion in a second. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Wait, hold on. Could either we improve the motion such that if somebody finds it in violation of our covenant, that we are waiving said?
No, it's not in violation of the covenant. It's not listed here as being in violation.
Okay.
I wanted to just make that clear.
Is this property in the TDA easement?
It is not. No.
Butts up against it.
Well, when
Yeah,
you
it
said
starts
it
against
was, probably couldn't be used because of the TDA power line, it
A lot
couldn't
of
be
it,
developed.
there's a creek pretty close by, and a lot of it's floodplain.
We've spent a lot of money to develop.
Call roll, Madam Secretary. All in favor, let it know. Saying aye and all opposed, no.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wigington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
Dr. Campbell?
Aye.
Mr. Crane?
Aye.
Mr. Fishman?
Aye.
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Heiss?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky? And Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Okay. Unanimous. So ordered, and the next item on the agenda is the consideration approval of document related to the power agreement for Van Hoom, U.S. Real Estate LLC. Marshall, are you gonna speak to that, or?
I'll probably let Bill and Jay speak to it. And Jay, you may wanna speak about why we even have to do this.
Yeah. Do you wanna maybe open up, just kinda give a background as to the project kind of scope, and then I'll go through the pilot terms, is that?
Yeah, so as you know, we approved this pilot months ago, and that was fine for us to do. We approve the terms of a pilot often, and typically the lawyers just do the documents, approve them, no problem. State law changed, now we have to come back and you all have to approve the document itself. So I guess either the state doesn't trust the lawyers or something. It's actually not that, we know what the reason is, but, whatever. So now you have to come back and approve the final documents that typically we didn't used to have to do. We approved it, the lawyers did the documents, it was in place. Now you have to come back for a second meeting every time and approve the documents. So that's what we're doing. Scope of the project, Van Hool is gonna purchase they will rent or lease 152 acres from the industrial board, for a term of 10 years. During that period, we'll extend their pilot term. Is that correct? Just shake your head or
Yeah.
say hell no. During that term, that property will be in the name of the industrial board. The lease will extend 10 years. They will make a prepaid lease payment of $800,000 for that, and of course, we'll pass that on to the city unless they're feeling generous.
Not that generous.
I respected that answer. And then the property will be subject to turning over to them at the end of 10 years for $1. So essentially, they're buying the property from us.
Marshall, remind us of, who is Van Hool U.S.? I forgot.
Yep, so that's our bus company, so the bus manufacturing company, they'll be looking, Tony, can you point to their two lots? Bus manufacturer.
Out of New Orleans?
Out of Belgium.
Belgium.
Yep, so lots 3 and 4 is what they'll take, about 152 acres roughly. They'll start with about a 500,000 square foot building. Their commitment so far has been 5 years, 650 jobs, but we see that increasing after speaking with them some. So, they could quickly grow and become quite larger than 650 jobs. They do have.
They haven't started any work on the.
They've not,
grading line yet?
no, and we have and sent to the city the recommendation of the sale of the property. But what they'll do is, once their board formally approves it tomorrow, Tuesday, they will probably come back to us with a grading plan, and we'll make them take the steps to come back through us for development of that property. So no, nothing's been done yet. Their hopes are to start grading in October, so they'll have to get a grading plan back to us for approval pretty quickly.
Which means that the board will have to meet again.
So does this agreement cover the total property that they will lease, or is it just a piece of it? Because I thought I heard you say two numbers.
It's 152 acres, it's all of it.
Well, I thought I heard him say 100 acres first.
Well, we had two separate lots,
Yeah.
the way they were divided, and we've combined, it was lots 3 and 4. One was 116 acres and one was 40-something, 38. So
That's
we've now
pad
combined.
that was graded, that's those two houses.
That's the houses. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the total property.
It is, yes.
And
Marshall.
And, and again.
They rent the property, pay $800,000 in prepaid rent, the lease. They build their facility on it. At the end of next year's, it's deeded to them.
Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah,
Is that the simplistic
So
term?
basically, yeah, there's kind of two, if you weren't doing the pilot for them, what they would do is just come in and buy the property for $800,000, and they'd own the property and they'd build their facility on it. Because we're doing, giving them a payment in lieu of taxes, so, basically a break on their property taxes, the way the money's gonna flow is, they'll pay $800,000 up front as the purchase price, and then they will lease the property through the pilot lease. The only reason the pilot lease is in place is for them to get the benefit of the tax abatement. And then at the end of the tax abatement, they'll get the property back.
A simple way to explain it is we're cutting one step of lawyers out of the process doing it this way.
Bless your heart.
Jay don't like that, no, he doesn't mind, but it's a step that the company don't have to pay the lawyers again. So if we transfer the property directly to them like they bought it, then you have to pay to transfer it back to the board. There's a bunch of steps you have to take. If we just do the pilot, we take possession of the property, essentially,
out a step.
it cuts out a step of lawyers.
So with the pilot program, are they gonna pay property taxes on the building if they build?
That's part of the payment, that's part of the pilot. That's the.
It is, but a
building
reduced
is-
amount.
The building is taxed as part of the land, and so they
They
are
don't own the
paying,
land.
and they are getting an abatement on part of the taxes for the land and the building and the equipment. That's why it's Van Hool Real Estate and Van Hool Manufacturing or something, different entities on different, the real estate and the equipment.
And maybe just to back up a little bit, the way a pilot works, in order to get abatement on your property taxes in Tennessee, the property, the real estate, the land, and the equipment can all be conveyed to the Industrial Development Board. And when it becomes titled in the name of the Industrial Development Board, the property becomes exempt from property tax, and so there is no property taxes owed. However, the IDB leases the property, the equipment, the land, the building to Van Hool, and in exchange for that lease, they agree to make a payment in lieu of tax. And here it's, for 10 years, the lease will run, plus the construction period, and they'll get 85% abatement on their land and personal property. Those are the terms that are incorporated in the pilot lease, so they'll.
Did you say 85%?
So we'll immediately get, today we're getting 0. We'll immediately get 15% of the taxes, which for that size facility will be pretty substantial. And then after 10 years, it'll all become taxable.
So they will not be asking for bids relative to the grading until after the grading plan's been approved? Someone asked me about when are they gonna ask.
Yeah, I don't know that.
That would come after the grading plan's been approved of.
I don't know, it depends on their contractors really.
Yeah,
Since they're a
I
private,
didn't
they
know
don't
either.
have to bid everything publicly, they can do it all
It'll
on
be
their own.
announced. when it
Yeah.
does,
And they come with their grading plan, in all probability, Jack, I would suspect, since they've taken this amount of time, and done the planning that they've done, I would suspect that they will ask for, they will have.
Yeah, I had a company ask me that, I told them I didn't know, I heard, I
And again, I assume that all of the 150-something acres are in Hamblin County.
They are.
Remember, this is routine, we've done this for years.
don't know.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
A lot of us just don't understand it,
Yeah.
me being one.
Any other questions? Not the chair will entertain a motion, for the approval of the documentation relative to the power agreement for Van Hool. You asked that you have it finally, the chair will entertain a motion.
I so moved.
Dr. Kell moved, is there a second? Ms. Wiggington seconded. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor, let it know by saying aye as your name's called. All opposed, no. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Dr. Campbell,
Aye.
Mr. Crane,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Heiss,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Perky, Mr. Ramsey,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Swan,
Yes.
Ms. Wiggington,
Yes.
and Mr. Bivens.
Yes.
Unanimous and so ordered. Next item on the agenda is the consider approval of the documentation related to a power agreement for Magnanimous Steel Incorporated. And in this particular case, like the other one, there's a motion in front of you at your desk, and we've approved this before. And actually, in this particular case, if you haven't been out there, the building's up, most of it, the steel is up. They are planning on being, I think, in production in late November. I don't know that they're gonna make it, but it's coming along very nicely, and it's a nice looking building, and a very nice addition to our industrial park. And it's in front. Tony, show them where it is on the map, would you please?
This is Cook Foods, the site's right here.
Okay. And you have that resolution in front of you, and the chair will entertain a motion for approval. For
So moved.
McNeil's. Mr. Crane moved, is there a second?
Second.
Second?
Question.
The floor is open for discussion.
During all of our previous discussions about McNellis Steel, if it was ever mentioned, and wouldn't have made any difference, but just for information, if I understand it, part of this property is in Jefferson County, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so on what basis I know we own, the city owns the property, but how do we go in and give a tax abatement program for property that's not taxed under the Hamlin County, City of Morristown
I'll let
tax
Jay
structure?
answer that,
Or who has the last say-so on it,
this board,
this board?
but Jay can tell you the law that covers us there.
So, under Tennessee law for pilots, as long as the property is located within the city limits of Morristown, then the IDB can approve an abatement, so long as it has a delegation resolution from the municipality that formed the IDB. So, in this instance, the city of Morristown formed this industrial development board, and the city of Morristown has delegated the authority to this board to approve pilots for any properties located within the city. And because the city limits extend both into a portion of Hamlin County and a portion of Jefferson County, then this board can abate the taxes of any property located within the city limits.
To let you know what I do though, if I'm gonna do that or discuss that with the company, I talk to the Jefferson County mayor and I say, hey, here's the project, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. Just to make sure they have an understanding. We don't wanna pop it on them that we're just giving away your taxes. I think for them, what they have to realize, the city or the state graded that lot $750,000 to purchase the property, put utilities in. So through no cost of their own, they're gonna start getting more money.
Sure.
Very similar to a Maylar. So Maylar got no pilot, that's all in Jefferson County.
Mhm.
They get all the benefit of that with the city of Morristown through no work of their own. So,
Just we'd never discussed that
Yeah.
before, and I always wondered what the
Yes,
the
we
law
have
was that
discussed
allowed
that.
us to do
Yes,
that.
we have discussed that before, Mrs. Smith, but because of your age, if you've forgotten it, I'm sorry for doing so.
I'd be willing to bet you that we haven't.
Yes, we have.
I'll say, the other way that they could have gone about it is, as to the portion of Hamlin County, they would have to go to either, this board or to, if there's a Hamlin County Industrial Development Board, they could go and get an abatement approved, for that piece through the county. And then as to the Jefferson County piece, they could go, and it would be a lot more complicated. We also do the pilot work for Jefferson County Industrial Development Board, and they have pilot policies as well. And looking at those pilot policies, if McNeillis had gone to the Jefferson County IDB, their pilot policies actually give a little bit more generous abatement. This board and Marshall does a really good job of, he doesn't give, compared to neighboring counties, you're a little bit tighter on what the incentives that this board gives, and so.
Ours is based on a formula that we adopted when we did this park, some 10 or 15 years ago. And it has to do the formula that the city and the county, that we propose the city and county, where when we go to talk to a prospect about it, really has to do with their investment and the number of jobs that they're going to employ, which we thought was the fair way to do it. Practically every industry certainly in Maid, has probably operated under this thing, and now they're all on tax rolls since time is expired. It's ordinary. This is a way of us providing incentive to be competitive. Now, some people are a lot more liberal than our board and our city and the county has been, but ours has worked for us and worked for us very well, and we've been competitive at it. And here again, the reason that we're really coming back to discuss all of this morning is the state changed the law in this last session of the legislature, which means that when we're negotiating with an industry, it's fine for us to tell them what we're going to do, but once we're ready to do it, we've got to come back and approve the legal documents. That's all we're doing today, is approving the legal documents of what we approved by the board to do probably 4 or 5 months ago. Is there any further questions?
Call for question.
Questions been called for. All those in favor of the motion in front of you for McNeilus Steel, let it know by saying aye. Is your name's called and all opposed, no. Call roll, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Crane?
Aye.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes?
Mr. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Heiss?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Yes.
Mr. Perky? Mr. Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Swan?
Yes.
Ms. Wigington?
Yes.
Mr. Bivens?
Yes.
And Dr. Campbell.
Unanimous and so ordered. Is there any other motions to come before the board this morning? Any other business? Anyone? Not, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Crane moved, all in favor, please, don't say.
Congratulations.
Aye. Aye. Opposed, no, motion